This conference will now be recorded.
Withholding tax or direct taxation. Normally, when you talk about withholding tax or direct taxation, we are talking about a TDS or WHT. Majoritarily, this TDS is charged on vendor or customer or both. This withholding tax,
Majority
is this
vendor.
applicable to customer or is this applicable to customer also? Is it applicable to customer or is it applicable to vendor as well?
Vendor.
Vendor only.
There are two terms that you have to remember. Point number one is TDS. Point number two is TCS. What is TDS?
It's deducted at source.
Tax deducted at source. What about TCS?
Tax collected at source.
Tax collected at source. Now this TDS is applicable for customer or vendor?
Vendor.
Vendor.
What about TCS?
Customer.
TCS is applicable for customer. In short, your withholding tax is applicable for both customer and vendor. If it is related to customer, you will be talking about TDS. If it is related to vendor, you will be talking about TDS. If this is related to customer, you will be talking about TCS, tax collected at source. Now let us try to pay attention and we'll try to understand this part alone in the current session, which is your tax deducted at source. When you talk about TDS or tax deducted at a source, in this, whenever you are doing any transaction with a vendor, your TDS is applicable. Whenever you do any transaction, when you talk about a vendor transaction, you need to understand vendor transaction flow. We put vendor transaction flow. Normally, when you create a vendor, what are the possible transactions that we can perform with the vendor? First one, you can create invoice. Second one, you can create credit memo. Third one, you can make payment. Fourth one, you can make down payment. Correct? Are these correct transaction flow for a vendor or possible transactions for a vendor? You will have an invoice to the vendor. You will have a credit memo from the vendor. You will have a payment to the vendor. You will also have a down payment or advance payment to the vendor. Normally, when you talk about TDS, your TDS will have to be charged or applicable for the first transaction. Any transaction that you perform, this is subject to TDS or withholding tax. How you are going to do this TDS or withholding tax? Whatever the transaction is taking place at the beginning, at that place you have to charge TDS for your vendor. In short, out of these four, there are only two which are possible for the initial transactions. The first position can be taken by two of the four transactions. What are those two? What are those two which can take place at the beginning for a vendor transactions?
Invoice posting. Invoice and credit memo.
First one, invoice can be posted at the beginning. Point number one, correct. Credit memo cannot be posted at the beginning because to post the credit memo, you need an invoice. Correct? Huh?
Yes, sir.
Without having an invoice, you cannot have a credit memo because credit memo must represent one invoice. Payment is
Ajay,
also without.
sorry
Yeah.
Ajay to disturb you. I have a doubt on this. Like first is the invoice, second is once we will receive the invoice, we will make the payment, right? Credit memo something is purchase return, right?
But that can happen at the immediately after making the purchase also. Because when you make the payment, you will adjust the credit memo with the invoice and then make the balance amount.
Yeah, yeah, understood it.
Yeah. Okay, invoice can be your first transaction, and after that, your first transaction can be down payment. In short, at the time of invoice or at the time of payment, whenever you talk about payment, you will be representing a down payment. Because down payment is the transaction which will happen initially to the vendor. Sometimes even before you take any product or any service, you will be releasing the payment to the supplier or to the vendor. This payment, whatever you are making to the vendor before receiving any product or any service, you call it as advance payment. Your TDS is applicable either on the advance payment or on the invoice, whichever is taking place first. Whether the invoice transaction is happening first or whether the payment transaction is happening first, you will have to charge TDS or you will have to deduct TDS. When you talk about payment transaction taking place first, we are talking about down payment in general. Okay, so here you have to remember in your mind that either invoice or the payment, any transaction that can take first, there you need to deduct the TDS or there you need to charge withholding tax. When you talk about withholding tax, your withholding tax or TDS is deducted as per local taxation law. As per local taxation law, this TDS or withholding tax is deducted. Now, there may be section codes. There may be section codes for it depending on the country. Certain countries will have section code according to so and so section, your TDS is chargeable. If you talk about India, you have section codes based on which you will have to deduct a TDS and then you have to provide a TDS certificate or tax certificate. Whoever is deducting the TDS, they will have to deduct the TDS as per the local taxation law. Now, this taxation law defines the different classification of TDS, and then against each classification of services, what is the tax rate to be deducted. Now, this law is something that we will be discussing about what are the section codes, against each section code what will be the percentage in the upcoming sessions. But remember, your TDS is always based on local taxation law, which will have the tax rate and tax section code. You will have the tax rate, you will also have the tax section code. According to these two things, you will be defining your configuration, you will be making withholding tax functionality in SAP. Now, this TDS is not India specific. This is TDS or withholding tax is global across the world. Many countries will have this concept of a TDS or withholding tax. So you should keep in your mind when somebody is asking you about a TDS, don't just keep that it is related to India. This is related to different other countries also. Okay, so in TDS or in withholding tax, you have two types of TDS. One is your classic withholding tax or TDS. The other one is extended withholding tax or TDS. One is classic, the other one is extended. In general, which one we will be using, classic or extended?
Extended.
Extended.
In general, we will be using extended withholding tax. This classic GL, concept, and this is your new GL concept. Classic withholding tax is your classic
It is applicable for
GL,
only when
which is your new GL. Now, normally we do not use classic GL in SAP. Currently, nobody uses classic GL. Whoever uses SAP will be using new GL concept or new GL functionality. According to new GL functionality, you must use extended withholding tax. And one point that you need to understand is what will be the difference between classic withholding tax and extended withholding tax. These are all the possible points that you may get in your interview as questions. About these interview questions on these topics, we will be discussing in the upcoming sessions. But for now, we have to keep in mind what are all the basic points that you need to remember when it comes to TDS. Now, let's talk about certain accounting entries. Let's say purchased professional services from XYZ audit firm for, let's say, 30,000 at the rate or TDS applicable at 10%. Clear? You purchased professional services from XYZ audit firm for 30,000. TDS applicable is 10%. Now, unlike your sales and purchase tax, there is no concept of inclusive, exclusive for TDS. Concept of inclusive, exclusive is not applicable. Your TDS is always inclusive or exclusive.
Exclusive.
TDS.
On net amount.
So is that inclusive or exclusive?
Exclusive.
Exclusive, are you sure?
Yes.
If the TDS percentage is 10% and the services that I took is 30,000, so my total charge is 33,000 or 30,000 or 27,000.
27,000. 30,000. It's inclusive.
My total liability, if I consider TDS 10%, will it be still 30,000 or it will increase? My total liability.
30.
It will remain 30,000. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Let's say. Now, assuming this is the invoice first. When I say invoice first, we mean that first you received the invoice, later on you made payment. Clear? When you talk about invoice first, this represents you received the invoice first, later on you made the payment. If you receive the invoice first, you need to pass the accounting entry for vendor invoice. Normally for vendor invoice, what is the accounting entry?
Vendor account credit, taxes account debit, withholding tax credit.
Let's say, repeat the accounting entry again.
Vendor account credit,
Okay. Vendor, in our case XYZ audit firm will be credit. Your vendor account will be credit. Okay. And what did you purchase? You purchased professional services. You need to debit which account?
professional services.
I'll put professional services debit.
30,000.
And which one you need to credit or debit?
TDS
TDS on
payable
professional service.
So that will be debit or credit?
credit. Credit.
So let's say how much your vendor has given you the liability, or how much
27,000.
is.
27,000.
Now when you have this, you have something called invoice. When you obtain the services from the vendor, do you have an invoice or you do not have an invoice?
Invoice.
If you purchase anything from any agency or anything, any service that you're procuring, which is defined as per Withholding Tax Act or as per TDS list. Assuming service charge or professional charge is one of the TDS related service, if you obtain this from XYZ audit firm, is this audit firm going to provide you an invoice or not?
It will provide. They will provide.
Right? They will provide one invoice. In that invoice, what will be the amount that they are going to mention?
They will mention total 30,000.
They will be mentioning 30,000 because you're talking about invoice first. When you're talking about invoice first, you must have received an invoice from the supplier,
Yes.
must have received invoice from the supplier. Now in this TDS, whenever you're talking about, if you talk from the India point of view, if you talk this TDS from India point of view, in order to deduct a TDS, what number is mandatory?
TAN number and PAN number.
There is something called PAN or TAN, which means the person who is giving you the service. So there is a list of services which are classified as TDS or withholding tax. According to the TDS list or according to withholding tax list, whatever the services that are listed in it, if you are rendering or if you are procuring any of them, you have two options. Because if you see from vendor point of view, you have two possibilities for a vendor. Your vendor can be an individual, your vendor can be an organization. Correct? Huh?
Yes, sir.
When you define a vendor, your vendor can be name of a person, your vendor can be name of an organization. Who will have the PAN number? Who will have the TAN number? PAN number is for individual or organization.
Organization.
number
Individual.
in individuals,
Individual.
TAN number organization.
PAN number is for individual, TAN number is for organization. Okay, PAN number is there for individual, TAN number, which means what is the PAN number?
Permanent account number.
Permanent account number. What is TAN number?
Tax account number.
Tax account.
Tax account number. So if you want to perform this withholding tax testing in SAP, you need to make sure for your vendor either TAN number or PAN number is updated depending on the nature of vendor. If it is an individual vendor, PAN number must be updated. If it is an organization as a vendor, TAN number is mandatory. Now here you need to put withholding tax. Is this withholding tax a liability or an asset?
Liability.
Is
Liability,
this
sir.
current liability or any other liability?
Current liability.
Current liability.
For all the current liability, we normally call it as payable. So here what should I write? Simply I'll put
TDS
TDS payable,
payable.
TDS
TDS
or
professional
withholding
services.
tax
Professional services
payable.
paid.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, companies will also have the PAN number, sir.
Companies will also have PAN number.
Yes, sir, it is denoted by
Yes.
fourth letter is C, sir, I think.
Yes, sir.
That is company's PAN number, not individual.
Okay. But that is normally called as organization only. That is tax identification number.
TAN number is only with the who deducts the tax, sir, I think.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So either ways, whether it is PAN or TAN. So in short, according to us, this is a tax number, tax identification number. Clear?
Yes, sir.
So
Without TAN number, one cannot deduct TDS and one cannot collect TDCS, sir.
without TAN number. So for organization, you need a TAN number, the person who is deducting it.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And the person who is paying will have to have PAN number.
Yes.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Is not having 20% will be.
PAN is mandatory for both the parties, sir. I think for both the deductor and deductee.
Yes, sir. PAN is
Okay.
mandatory.
Okay. So I'll put individual or organization here. In short, taxpayer. Correct? Sorry, payee. Payer or payee?
For both, sir. Both.
Both?
Yes, sir. The person who deducts the tax is called deductor, and person from whom the tax is collected is known as deductee.
So which means he is a tax payee. What we should put here? For PAN, this is an individual or an organization. I'll say one who pays the tax. Correct?
Yes, sir.
This is organization or individual. Individual can also deduct the tax.
No, sir.
Individual cannot deduct the tax. So this will be organization only. Here I'll put
Individual can deduct tax
But need
if his
TAN
turnover
number.
is more than 1 crore, sir.
okay. So here I'll put same thing. Individual or organization, one who deducts the tax. Correct? Is this correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now coming back to the accounting entry, this is your expense account debit, whatever the service that you have procured, and vendor account credit, the person who provided you the service. Next one, TDS or withholding tax payable account credit. If you put this accounting entry, you have one on the debit side, two on the credit side. Now debit side, what will be the amount that you take? Is this 30,000 or
30,000.
30,000 plus tax?
30,000.
It will be 30,000. I will take 30,000 here. Next one, for vendor account, what you will take?
27,000.
27,000.
27,000. You will always make payment. You'll always make payment with the deduction of TDS to the supplier from your total supply, whatever you've received, or from the total service that you've received. From the total service, tax portion will be paid to the government, and the after deducting the tax, whatever is left over, that will be paid to the supplier. Correct? So I should always take my service charge as 100%. Correct? Whatever I've received, I need to take as 100%. TDS, I need to deduct 10%. So what will be left over from 100%? 90. So out of 100% amount, 90% will be charged to the vendor account, 10% will be charged to the TDS account. Is this correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So if I have to put 90% on 30,000, it will be 27,000. So I'll have to take 27,000 on the credit side and 3,000 on the TDS side. And if I do a total, this is what we are getting. Is this accounting entry correct?
Yes.
This is in case of invoice coming first from your supplier. Sometimes you'll not get invoice first. Sometimes you will have to make payment first. When you are making the payment first, invoice entry will be recorded later on, but first you need to record the payment entry. So any payment that you are making before receiving the invoice is called as advance payment, correct? Any payment that you receive or any payment that you make to the supplier before receiving the invoice is called as advance payment or down payment. When it comes to advance payment or down payment, what normally will happen?
Sir, vendor account debit to cash or bank.
Bank account credit, special GL account.
So assuming that advance first, and here we'll put 10,000 advance first. Here let's assume your invoice value will be 30,000 only, but you are making the payment of advance 10,000, because there is no rule that you have to pay 100% advance, correct?
Yes, sir.
You may pay 50% advance, you may pay any percentage of the amount as advance. Assuming your invoice value remains this one, and you are making advance payment 10,000. What will be the accounting entry here?
Vendor special
First,
GL account debit.
Vendor account debit to bank.
Bank
so
account credit
normally,
withholding.
right, normally you need to see this from the as usual vendor transaction only. You should always look at it from the vendor transaction only, apart from adding a tax portion. This is your advance payment. Advance payment is nothing but normal vendor payment. Whatever the accounting entry that you get at the time of making a payment to vendor, same accounting entry you will get here also. If you have tax, then you will get additional line item for tax. For tax, you need to decide whether to debit or to credit. But the normal payment for your vendor will remain as it is. Normally, whenever you make any payment, you are going to debit vendor account, you are going to credit bank account, correct?
Yes, sir.
So I'll put my vendor payment entry as usual. XYZ audit firm debit bank outgoing credit. This will be my accounting entry. If I'm making TDS, I need to account the TDS also. If I'm making the TDS payment, should I debit my TDS or should I credit my TDS?
Credit.
Credit.
Credit side.
Let's say TDS or withholding tax payable. This will be credit. If I have to pay 10,000, what amounts will come here?
10,000.
Here,
9,000.
here.
1,000.
Is this entry correct? Is this
Yes, sir.
entry correct? If you look at the previous entry, in the previous entry, the TDS portion is deducted from vendor account. But in this case, we are deducting the TDS portion from bank account. Is it still correct? In
No, sir.
previous entry, TDS is deducted from vendor account. In the second entry, TDS is deducted from bank account.
Yes, sir, it is correct.
Now you will have the exact entry that you are able to see on the screen as the interview question in if somebody is asking you about TDS. They want you to explain the accounting entry and they will be creating the similar confusion in your mind. Is this correct or not correct?
Correct, sir.
Incorrect.
This entry is correct. Now we will understand why this entry is correct. I'll compare both the entries and then show the full cycle. Now this is your accounting entry in case if you are making the TDS during the advance, or in case if you are making the advance payment at the beginning. So if you are making the advance payment at the beginning, your vendor account will be posted with 100%. This will be 10%. Bank will be 90%. Correct? Now, in
10%
short,
and 9,000 now, sir.
10% on
9,000.
So in this accounting entry, are these values correct?
Yes, sir.
The 10,000 is what we are paying on total. So based on the
Payment
invoice
10,000.
amount is 9,000. So we need to pay 10% on 9,000 now, sir.
Now, during this entry, you are going to pay 10,000 as TDS, or because your advance payment is only 10,000. If your advance payment is 10,000, you are supposed to deduct a TDS on whatever the amount that you are paying.
Okay.
Okay, if your advance payment is for 10,000, on 10,000, which means on the payment amount, you have to deduct your TDS. Your payment amount is 10,000, your TDS rate is 10%. On 10,000, you will be deducting 10%, which will come as 1,000.
Yeah, correct,
Okay,
sir.
assuming this is a scenario. This is normally straightforward scenario. If you are booking the invoice first, that is a straightforward scenario. In case if you are not booking the invoice first, then you will have to have clear understanding, because this is a little tricky part. We need to have clear understanding here. I'll put negative, put number format.
This is exclusive series, exclusive method.
Yeah, TDS is exclusive method. So what I will do, I will take this scenario first. Clear? I think I'll put this here. Now I'm going to take this side. Now let's look at only this part. Look at only left side where we have this scenario. Now what I'll do here, if I have to account this completely, if you have to record the complete financial transaction for this, how this is going to reflect in your vendor account, how this is going to reflect in your bank account, how this is going to reflect in your TDS account. Assuming that you have received invoice first, you posted the invoice entry first. After invoice, what will happen?
We have to make the payment.
After invoice, you'll have to make the payment. So you'll write entry during invoice booking. This is our entry during invoice booking. Now next, after the invoice entry, you need to book payment. Entry during payment booking. When you book the payment, how you are going to make the payment? What entry you are going to pass?
XYZ audit form debit to bank outgoing credit.
I'm going to put XYZ audit form debit and then bank outgoing credit. How much we will be paying to the vendor?
27,000.
27,000.
You will be making payment of 27,000 and here also 27,000. And if I do the accounting total, this will be 0. This is basically my payment entry.
Here it will not come any like a great side that TDS history.
No, TDS entry will not come because this 10% TDS, whatever is deducted, is not supposed to be paid to the vendor, which is supposed to be paid to the government. Okay, this is your entry during, let me write, vendor payment booking. So whatever the amount you are supposed to pay to the vendor, only to that extent you are making the payment entry. If you look at your vendor account here, your vendor account is on the credit side here, your vendor account is on the debit side here. If you see the impact from the vendor account, is this becoming cleared or not? 27,000 liability booked at the beginning.
Yes, sir.
27,000 liability booked in the vendor account in the invoice and 27,000 is paid to the vendor. In short, if I look at from my vendor account perspective, there is no outstanding to the vendor. 27 has become 0. But if I look at the total transaction point of view, out of 30,000, how much bank payment you have made?
27,000.
27,000.
That 30,000 is your this one. Out of 30,000, you should have the payment entry for 30,000. Do we have 30,000 payment entry or something is still missing? 3,000 is missing.
Yes.
TDS is missing. Now you will have to pay this amount to the government separately. When you do it, you may be doing it on a monthly basis, you may be doing it on a quarterly basis. When you do it, your tax returns, at that time you will account all the TDS entries that you have accumulated and then you will be releasing the payment or remitting this payment to the government. For that, you will have to have another entry during TDS or withholding tax remittance to government. Correct? When you make this payment to the government, what entry you are going to record? Which account will be debited? Which account will be credited?
TDS payable debit to bank.
Yes, TDS to outgoing bank.
TDS payable account will be debit and then your bank outgoing will be credit. And this will be for 3,000 on the debit side, 3,000 on the credit side. If you do a total, this will become 0. Let me do a total for this. This is your third accounting entry. If you look at this, your bank account is also credited with 3,000.
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, if you see the TDS account is 3,000 here and your TDS account is here. In short, if you look at all the colors, is every color offsetting to 0?
Yes.
You have 30,000 here. The total value of your invoice, this 30,000 is paid in two parts. Out of 30,000, 90% is paid to the supplier and the remaining 10% is paid to the government. And this 27,000 vendor account has been cleared here during the payment. Your TDS 3,000 is cleared during the TDS remittance to the government. Correct? Are these accounting entries clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So the accounting entry is clear, but sorry for asking this question late, just because my mic was not working. So the calculation is like, is it inclusive tax or exclusive tax, sir?
This
The
is
TDS.
always inclusive.
So inclusive means this should be 110% equal to 30,000. Then the TDS should be different. It should be a different amount, right? The calculation part was a bit confusing, sir.
When you talk about inclusive, you mean this 30,000 including a 10% tax. So your tax is always calculated whatever the amount that you have. Let's say 30%, on that you put 10%, this amount you will be deducting from your amount. Unlike your GST or unlike your sales purchase tax, wherein you are going to calculate in a different way, because there are two possibilities there in your sales purchase tax, correct? Your
Yes, sir.
value can increase, your value can decrease, but in case of TDS, your value remain fixed. If it is 30,000 value invoice, your invoice value remains 30,000 fixed. Whatever the tax rate that you are getting, you will be charging on this 30,000 and then you will be deducting it, because this 30,000 is including TDS. To be very precise, this TDS on your withholding tax is calculated as exclusive method and deducted as inclusive method. Clearer?
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Got
Yeah,
it, sir.
but we can say as inclusive, right?
This is inclusive only. But when you see it from the GST or sales purchase tax point of view, when you talk about inclusive, the way you calculate the tax percentage is different. You will not be charging 10 by 100, you will be charging 10 by 110.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Now
But
let
this
me
to,
quick.
but this total scenario exclusive series, na sir. Exclusive method, na sir. This
This is
total.
exclusive, but your TDS, you cannot call it as exclusive. When you are calling it as exclusive, you have to add 10% to the invoice amount. We are calling it as inclusive because this 30,000 is including 10% TDS.
Yes, sir. 30,000 into 10 for 3,000.
So this 30,000 whatever you have is not going to increase. If you normally, according to your previous taxation method, which is your sales tax, purchase tax, if you're talking about exclusive method, your invoice value or your product value will be increased. 30,000 you will put 10% and then you will be taking it as 33,000.
Correct, sir.
Yes, sir.
But here
Yes.
we are not taking it as 33,000. You are calculating a 10% based on exclusive method, which is 30,000 multiplied by 10 divided by 100. And then this 10% 3,000 you are deducting from 30,000 instead of adding it to 30,000. Because this 30,000 is including 10% TDS value. Clear? We are not supposed to relate the calculation method from sales purchase tax to TDS, because these two are two entirely different tax calculations, not similar. Clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now let me put the accounting impact or financial impact in the respective accounts. How many accounts are involved here? How many colors we have put? 3 colors.
3.
So first one will be your vendor account. Let's see what is happening to your vendor account. I'll take debit, I'll take credit. In vendor account, you have a credit of 30,000 or 27,000 during invoice booking.
27.
27,000. So I'll put 27,000 on the credit side. And when you made the payment, what happened to your vendor account?
27,000.
27,000 is booked on the debit side. So I'll put 27,000 on the debit side. Net, if I look at my vendor account, if I look at my vendor account, is this becoming zero? Debit, credit?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
So in vendor account, there is no further impact, there is no excess shortage payment. Next account that we were talking about is TDS payable. I'll copy the same. I'll put this here. TDS payable account. In TDS payable account, initial entry was booked at what?
3,000.
Initial entry was booked
Credit.
at 3,000 credit. So on the credit, I'll put 3,000. Next one, your TDS account has been debited during the payment. So this 3,000 I'll put on this. Is your TDS account is also clear?
Yes, sir.
Last account that you had was bank account.
Bank.
Bank outgoing account. In your bank outgoing account, how many entries are posted? Your first
2.
entry is credited for 27,000. Second entry is credited for 3,000. So I'll put 27,000 is first credit and then 3,000 is second credit. There is no debit in the bank account. Correct? We don't have any debit in the bank account. I put Is this clear? In your bank
Yes, sir.
account, in total you have an impact of 30,000 credit balance, and you are supposed to pay 30,000 to this, and you paid 30,000 here. One sec. Yes, 30,000 professional charges you paid, and 30,000 you put here. Next one, you have professional charges account. In the professional charges account, what did we do?
30,000.
30,000 was posted on the debit side. There is nothing on the credit side and nothing here. Professional charges account. Now, in short, if you look at all the accounts together, is this financial impact correct? Which account is debited, which account is credited, and for what amount? Is this clear?
Sir.
Right. Now, let us take the same scenario on the other side. Let us not look at what we posted if you have received invoice first. This is in case if you have received, if you made payment first. If you are making payment first, what will be the financial interest? Your first accounting entry will be this one. First accounting entry will be this one. So how did we write here? Entry during invoice booking. So I'll put this will be entry during advance payment. So when you are making advance payment, what will be the accounting entry that you are going to write? This is what we have listed. Now after receiving the advance payment, what will happen? After advance payment, what will happen? You will receive the invoice, correct? After advance payment, you will be receiving the invoice. When you receive the invoice, then what will be the entry? Entry during invoice booking. For invoice booking, the entry will remain as it is. I'll put same color. And what will be the values here, amount here? You receive the invoice, what will you debit, what will you credit? What amounts you are going to debit and credit?
30,000 professional services.
30,000 will be your expense account. Vendor account will be credited with
27,000.
27,000. TDS
3,000.
3,000. Always remember, whether you are posting invoice first or whether you are posting advance first, your invoice is always posted for the full amount, correct? You should always record the invoice for full amount. You cannot say that I have already posted the advance payment, now for the balance amount I will charge TDS deduction at the time of invoice, which is wrong. Your invoice should always be posted for the full amount, irrespective of the scenario, whether it is invoice first or payment first. Invoice should always be created for the total amount. The invoice value is 30,000. You are going to put 30,000 here. The vendor will be paid only 90% of the invoice, so you will take 90% value here. Last one, TDS is 10%. You have taken 10% amount in the TDS. One sec. Now this will be your accounting entry for invoice booking. Let's say after invoice booking, what accounting entry you will get? If I do a total for this is what we are getting. After invoice booking, what else you will get? What will be the next accounting entry? After invoice, it's about your payment. During vendor payment, or entry during vendor payment booking. For vendor payment, what will be debit, what will be credit?
Vendor account debit.
So in short, XYZ will be debit, bank account credit. Is this correct? In the final payment, how much you are going to pay? How much you will pay here?
20,000.
27.
You already paid advance of 10,000. There is
18,000.
already advance payment.
18,000.
18,000.
18,000. And bank will be credit 18,000.
18,000.
Now, if I take this accounting entry here,
17,000.
and the last entry that we posted, we will check all the accounting account wise. There we will understand where we are going wrong and why we are going wrong. Okay. Last one is your during this entry. This is your final accounting entry when you make payment to the government. Now if I reduce this zoom, here how many entries you got? 3 accounting entries you got, and here you got 4 accounting entries, 1 additional accounting entry for advance payment, correct? Now if you see this from the vendor account point of view, I'll write the accounts here for this scenario. First I'll put vendor account, then I'll put debit credit here, now in vendor account what is debited, what is credited? First entry, is there any impact in the vendor account?
10,000 debit.
First entry you have 10,000 debit, and in the second entry you have
7,000
27,000
credit.
credit. I'll take 27,000 credit here. In the third entry 18,000
17,000.
credit. Here we have listed 18,000 on the debit side. Let's put as per the entry that we have posted, and any other entry we did not put any other entry here. Now if you do the total for this, debit side you are getting 28,000, credit side you are getting 27,000. So numbers are slightly not matching.
Yes.
Correct? There is some difference.
Yes, sir.
What is the difference?
17,000.
So the difference is
27 minus.
correct. The difference amount is what? 1,000.
Yes, sir.
This 1,000 is coming from where?
TDS on advance payment.
Yeah, this 1,000 is difference coming from TDS on advance payment. If you look at this here, during the vendor advance, are we deducting TDS from vendor account, or are we deducting TDS from bank account?
Bank account.
In this case, TDS is deducted from vendor account or TDS is deducted from bank account?
Bank account.
TDS is not deducted from vendor account. If your advance payment was 10,000, your vendor account is debited with 10,000, not 10,000 minus TDS, correct? Your vendor account during the advance payment is not deducted with any TDS portion, which means, in short, your advance payment is not going to create any difference in your invoice booking. Your advance payment is not going to create any difference in your invoice booking. That is why during the invoice booking you have posted 30,000, you credited 3,000 to the TDS account. Now if you see this, TDS account is credit of 3,000 here, TDS account is credit of 1,000 here. What is the total TDS here?
4,000.
4,000.
4,000. But according to this scenario, on 30,000, if it is 10%, it is supposed to be 3,000. But we ended up charging 4,000. So one more entry will come here, which is not supposed to be posted. So what is the entry that is not supposed to be posted? This 1,000, correct?
Yes.
If you are charging TDS on advance payment 10%, you are not supposed to charge advance payment TDS again during the invoice. Is that right? Because of this we are duplicating 1000 here.
You have to adjust that.
Right, this 3000 is the full TDS amount on the invoice, which is 3000, but here on the advance payment portion TDS is already accounted. TDS is already accounted during the advance payment, but during the invoice you are again accounting on the advance portion also. So that is the reason whatever the amount you paid as advance, on that advance whatever the amount that you apply, which is your TDS. On advance payment 10,000, if I charge 10%, I get 1000. This 1000 will become the balance amount here. That is what you are getting here, 1000. Correct? This 1000 is what coming up as balance amount here. Normally when you do this, all these accounting entries whatever we have posted are correct. But before you make the vendor final payment, there will be one more entry posted. Before you make vendor final entry, there will be one more entry posted. Whenever you create any advance, this advance will have to be, what is this advance first of all? Advance is a normal transaction or special GL transaction?
Special.
Special GL.
Advance is a special GL transaction. Now this special GL transaction will have to be converted into normal GL transaction. Am I correct? Any
Yes,
special GL transaction that we post, we will have to convert that as normal GL transaction.
Normal.
This is
Right.
special GL. We will do it in a couple of days in the morning session. So there I'll explain in detail why you need to create all this. For now, to make you understand, any special GL transaction that you post will have to be converted to normal GL transaction before you apply the advance payment to the invoice. Otherwise, this special GL transaction cannot be compared with your normal GL transaction. If you say that you received invoice for this amount, if you received invoice for this amount, you must apply this amount to the invoice so that your invoice will start showing the balance amount as outstanding. Correct? When I receive 30,000 invoice, against this invoice, am I supposed to pay the total amount or I already paid some amount?
Already paid some amount.
Against this invoice, there is already an existing advance payment. So when I book this invoice, I need to make sure immediately I will apply this advance payment to this invoice payment, so that when I go to the payment entry, I will know what is the current outstanding on this invoice. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Before I make to the payment screen or before I initiate the payment, I must know what is my invoice value, what is my advance or down payment value, what is my current outstanding, what is the balance amount to be paid to the vendor. In order to understand this, you must link your advance payment to the respective invoice. For that, you will have another accounting entry here. You will get another entry here, entry during advance payment application to invoice. You will have to apply your advance payment to invoice. Now here what will happen? What will normally happen here?
TDS account will be debited by 1000 and vendor account will be credited by 1000.
Let's say I'll put TDS withholding tax payable debit. This will be 1000 and offset will go where?
XYZ audit form.
XYZ audit form. I'll put this here and this will be negative 1000, and if I do a total here, this is becoming 0. Is this entry correct? Is this accounting entry correct? What is happening here? Whatever the TDS that is deducted during the advance payment, this TDS payment which is deducted during the advance payment is reversed during the applying or during the application of advance to the invoice. Correct?
Ajay,
Yes.
here I have confusion. Like you're converting the special GL to normal GL, right?
Correct. So when you're converting special GL to normal GL, in short, when you're applying your advance payment to the invoice, because you have to link that this advance payment is related to this invoice. Only then when you select this invoice, system will tell this is the current outstanding. For that to happen, you must pass this entry. During this entry, system is going to reverse the TDS that is posted. If you are not telling this accounting entry, if you are not talking about this entry, in your interview especially, you will be confused. And they are going to ask you this question exclusively to know this accounting entry. When somebody is asking you to explain the financial impact of TDS, if there is any advance payment, the only intention, the only point behind asking that question is this accounting entry. They're expecting you to talk about this accounting entry. That's the only reason they want you to tell this entry. If you're skipping or if you're not talking about this accounting entry, whatever you talk is considered as wrong. You do not have any idea about how TDS works from the accounting point of view. Your configuration may be correct, but when it comes to accounting, your explanation is wrong. If you try to put all these numbers in this accounting, you will end up doing wrong. Now here, during the payment, your vendor outstanding is supposed to show 18,000 or 17,000. Now I'll remove this. I'll remove all these amounts. Until here, let us pass the vendor accounting entries.
Ajay, here I
If you look,
have like a doubt here.
yes.
Ajay. Like if you are doing manually down payment, then if you are doing through APP, automatic payment scenario will be different or something.
No, whatever the way you do it, it will be the same. Whether you process it manually, whether you process it through automatic, the accounting entry is not going to change.
So like in APP, we are converting the special GL into normal GL.
In APP, you cannot convert it. This conversion is always out of APP. This is a manual process. In APP, you will be processing down payment. This entry is possible through APP. But this is a pure manual entry because the system does not know this advance payment is to be adjusted against which invoice.
Okay. So is there any way to pay the withholding tax through automatic payment program? F110?
You can pay it. If you have the tax code given in it, system will automatically deduct it. Withholding tax payment to whom? You mean to deduct the withholding tax payment or to pay the withholding tax payment?
We have to deduct the withholding.
Deduction of withholding tax payment you can do through APP. It will deduct.
Okay.
Okay, when we do APP in the morning sessions, I'll show all these scenarios.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll pass the same entry as it is for the same numbers. I'll show both from manual calculations. I'll show both from APP calculations. Okay. So here, if you take the first entry during the advance payment, we are only looking at vendor account impact currently. In the vendor account, there is a 10,000 debit. We took 10,000 debit. In the next entry during your invoice, you have 27,000 credit here. You are taking 27,000 credit here. In the third entry, is there any impact in the vendor account?
Yes, sir.
So there is an
Minus
impact of
1,000.
1,000. So it's a credit 1,000 here. It's a credit 1,000 here. Next one. In this entry, before you come to payment, which means before coming to this screen, if I look at my vendor account balances, what is On the credit side, 28,000. What is on the debit 1,000? 10,000. How much is outstanding? $28,000 credit balance minus 10,000 debit balance. What will be the leftover amount?
18,000.
18,000.
18,000. Is this 18,000 payable or receivable to the vendor?
Payable.
So this 18,000 is payable to vendor. 18,000 payable to vendor. Now let us identify whether this 18,000 payable to vendor is correct or not. So first what you do, first payment to vendor. How much you paid to vendor first? When you're talking
9,000.
about payment, look at the bank account because we're talking
9,000
about payment.
9,000.
9,000.
First.
First payment we made 9,000 to the vendor. So after that, any other payment you made, or directly you are going to do the final settlement?
Only final settlement.
18,000.
Now we are directly doing the final settlement, correct? Only one advance payment he received, he gave you the invoice, you booked the invoice, now you need to settle the invoice. Now according to your invoice, your vendor is supposed to be paid how much?
27,000.
Your vendor is supposed to receive 27,000 payment. Out of 27,000, how much is already paid?
9,000.
Alright, so total outstanding of vendor is 27,000, correct?
Yes.
Now balance to be paid.
18,000.
How much is the balance to be paid? It is 18,000. If you write these accounting entries, is this balance 18,000? Is this 18,000 correct with these accounting entries before this
Yes,
entry?
yes. Yes.
Clear? You paid
Yes.
9,000 at the beginning to the vendor, right? Which is not inclusive of TDS.
Right.
Because that TDS, whatever is posted during the advance payment, is reversed here. Correct? TDS, whatever is posted during advance payment, is reversed while applying the advance payment to the invoice. Now this is the standard process in SAP. This is standard process in SAP. For you to do this, you need to do one setting in the withholding tax configuration. You need to put one setting in withholding tax configuration, and you need to make sure your bank GL account, whatever you are using, must be enabled with. There is something called cash flow, something in the bank GL account in FS00 relevant to cash flow.
Yes, sir.
If you go to FS00, if you select any bank GL account, for example, this account, if I go to create bank interest, you have something called create bank something called relevant to cash flow. Can you see this field relevant to cash flow? If you tick this, this thing will happen in SAP. If you don't tick that, this will not happen. This is one setting that you need to do in your bank GL account. You need to tick relevant to cash flow for bank accounts. Point number 2, during your withholding tax configuration, you need to put central invoice. If you put central invoice in your withholding tax, and then if you put relevant to cash flow in your bank GL account, this entry will be posted. If not, system will pass the entry, but it will not reverse this. If this is not reversed, you will end up either paying more or you will end up paying less. So your account balances will not match if your TDS, whatever is posted during the advance, is not reversed. And this entry will be reversed based on two options. Option number 1, GL account must have relevant to cash flow enabled. Option number 2, your TDS tax code configuration must have, or your tax type configuration must have central invoice setting. With these two combinations, system is going to reverse your TDS which is posted during the advance. If not, this is not going to happen. If this is not going to happen, you will not realize, but when you look at the accounting flow, you will end up having 1000 mismatch. If you don't do this, every accounting entry will get posted. You will not get any error anywhere. It will not give you errors anywhere. But if you are not going and verifying the vendor account balance like this, you will not understand that you have gone wrong. If this is not posted, if this entry is not posted, if there is no credit here, this will become 27,000. You are making payment to vendor as how much? 27,000, correct? 17,000 will be shown as outstanding. Ignore this. If I take this part alone, if you go by vendor account, if I don't put this 1000 credit here, if I put 1000 credit here, let me take difference between this and this. What is the difference here now? 18,000, correct? Is this 18,000 correct outstanding or wrong outstanding?
Correct.
Correct outstanding. What if system is not posting this entry? Because I said the two settings, if those are not in place or if those are not defined properly, this entry will not be posted by system. In that case, you will not find 1000 here. In that case, you will end up paying 17,000.
Yes,
System is telling you vendor is showing outstanding of 17,000. If you make 17,000 outstanding, are we short paying the vendor or overpaying the vendor?
short.
We are making a short payment of 1,000. There will be a short payment of 1,000. You will not be able to figure out this unless you get this accounting entry. Only for this accounting entry you will be questioned this. Practically in your interview, they want you to explain one example and then convince them. Clear? And when you are working in a project, your client is going to verify like this. And even before your client verifies it, during your testing, you must verify like this. Any round figures of your choice, because you are going to test it in development server. When you test in development, make sure you test with practical scenarios with your imaginary figures of your understanding. Because when you are going to test in the quality system, your vendor is not going to post random figures like we post. Your vendor will literally take the one live physical invoice. So those who are part of any UAT sessions, especially for vendor transactions like this, they are not going to pass random entries. Instead, they will take the live entries of last month or current month. And they will see if I account it, is my accounting happening properly or not. They will check the complete accounting flow. In this account, what is the outstanding in that account? Can you show me that account balance? How this will affect my P&L? All these kind of things you will be asked to display, to project during your UAT session. No surprise, you may have to project your laptop to in the conference room or in the meeting room. You will have to show them all these things. And they might ask you different questions. How do I know that why this 1000 is not deducted? Where this 1000 went? Why this mismatch is coming? As a FICO consultant, it is your responsibility to answer all these questions and then convince your client. Because whatever they are talking from the accounting point of view. And wherever they get confused, they are going to seek your advice how this is reflected in SAP. They know how this is accounted in general, but their accounting in general, they want to see it in SAP. For that, they require your support. And remember, your screen may be projected on the, what is that called, in the meeting room. So in that meeting room projection, can you Google?
No.
No other option. You have to know what is supposed to be happened, what you need to talk. Keep these points in your mind so that you will not forget to remember things.
Sir, can you please mention these two conditions in the left hand side so we can note it down?
If you go to TDS configuration on SPRO, SAP reference IMG, go to financial accounting, global settings, you have withholding tax. Inside this you have two things. One is your withholding tax, the other one is extended withholding tax. This withholding tax is used for classic GL, which we normally do not use. We will be using this extended withholding tax. Open this. In this, if you go to calculation, you will find a tax type. Maybe you select any one. Not here. Let's go to payment posting. You will find something called central invoice. Now, in the withholding tax type for payment posting, if you see at the bottom central invoice,
Yes, sir.
here you need to take this radio button, central invoice proportion. When you do this, system is going to adjust whatever the TDS that is paid during the advance, that will get reversed. If you don't do this, that will not get reversed. This is one setting that is to be maintained, and the second setting that you need to make sure is in your bank
Okay.
GL account, this relevant to cash flow is updated. Only if these 2 points are updated, your TDS will get reversed when you apply advance payment to the invoice. Otherwise, it will not get deducted and you will end up finding a mismatch of the advance payment TDS in the vendor account. You will not even realize that there is a mismatch coming of 1000 unless you verify the accounting. Because nowhere you will get any error message, it will pass all the entries without any errors. The only point that will be skipped is this entry will be skipped. But it will not give any error anywhere. So it is your responsibility to make sure the flow is properly validated, flow is properly verified, and your accounting is validated from your side before you go and sit in front of your client. Because when you're doing it, this is not a physical invoice that you are testing, correct?
Yes, sir.
This is not a physical invoice that you are testing, but in your UAT session, no surprise, sometimes your client will post the entry during UAT. Sometimes you will be sitting and you will be sharing the screen and you will be posting the entry during UAT. Both are possible. Your client will pass the entry in UAT, possible scenario. You will be showing your screen and then you will be posting the entry. Your client will see the impact. They will tell, okay, this is fine, this is fine. That is also possible. But in either ways, it will be projected on the screen in the meeting or conference room. You'll have to sit and guide or you'll have to sit and do. This is what practically you are going to do when you're working on UAT session. If you're on site with the client location, if not, you will be sharing your screen. The way I'm sharing my screen on this, you will be sharing your screen on Microsoft Teams. You will send a meeting invite in that all the candidates or all the users, the different stakeholders will be there. There you need to project the screen and then do it. In case if your user is sharing the screen, wherever they are going wrong, as a consultant, you have to step in, you have to instruct. You cannot keep quiet if the user is doing a mistake in UAT session. Am I correct?
Yeah, yes, sir. Can you advise one thing? If the config is already done and we are going in a UAT session, right? So we need to make any kind of changes. We need to change request for the same, or otherwise we can do on the only client requirement without any approval.
This is the configuration issue because the system is not
Right,
working fine, correct? So
right.
these
This is a
things,
config issue.
so
So
in that UAT,
we
what you are going to do against that test scenario in your UAT script, you are going to put the result. Result will be okay or not okay. So here it will be not okay. If it is okay, it is fine. If it is not okay, you are going to write remarks.
yes
So
for for
config
for further
issue,
updation we need approval and change request for the same, right? Without change
not
request
required.
can
If you
be
are in the
do the config.
implementation project, approval is not required. If you are on the support project, yes, approval is required. It depends on in which project you are working on this. If you are working on implementation, if you
UAT
are working
session
on
is the implementation
implementation,
is completed. Yeah.
if you are on implementation, no approval. If you are on support, yes, approval is needed. But approval is not needed for this because these changes are in quality. You are testing in quality. For moving changes from development to quality, you do not need any approval. You need approval for moving changes to production system. So when you are testing in quality system, getting the corrections is quite common. Getting the corrections in quality testing is common, for which there is no approval. In case if it is something which is not related to config, it is related to process change, then as you said, approval is required. Because initial discussion or initial requirement was different, now they told the different requirement, they want it to work in a different way. For that, if you have to make any config changes, you need an approval or you need an email from them asking you to change this. Clear?
Yeah.
All right. So clear, right? Those 2 points are to be there. Here if I put 1000, this will become 18,000. Now your balance amount to be paid will become 18,000. This is your vendor account balance in case if you have the advance payment. Apart from this, you will have bank outgoing account. If you take bank outgoing account, debit and credit, how much is posted in bank outgoing account, debit and credit?
First we credit 9,000.
First you put a credit of 9,000. Next one, here there is no bank
Is
account. If you see, there is no bank
80
account here.
18,000 second
Second you
credit
paid 18,000
with
and finally you paid 3,000.
3,000 more. Yeah. Total
In short,
is
if I do a total, this is 30,000.
30,000.
Is this clear?
Yes.
Now after bank account, let's take TDS or withholding tax payable account. If you take this account, let me take debit and credit, debit, credit. In withholding tax payable, first entry was credited for 1000, correct? I'll put
Yes.
1000 on the credit. In the next entry, there is a credit of 3000.
Yes.
I'll put credit 3000. In the next entry, there is a debit of 1000.
Right.
I will put 1000 debit. Now, if I do a sum
3,000.
of this, 1000 here and 4000 here, the net impact will be how much? 3000.
Yeah.
The net impact is 3000, correct?
Yes, sir.
And finally, your what is that account? Professional services account. professional services account. In professional services account, what did we do? Debit or credit? Debit, credit. Professional services account is debited with 30,000. If I come down and then if I put 30,000 here, this is what you get. Center, and then I'll put it this one. Are these accounting entries clear for the advance payment?
So can you please go on a tax one? TDS, TDS, and last.
This one?
Yes, yes, yes. So debit, I need. I think the 1,000 will first 1,000 will be debit, then 3,000 we will pay. No? So I think 3,000 is also coming in the debit section.
Where 3,000? If you
Duty.
see here,
Uh,
your debit balance in the withholding tax account is how much? 3,000. Correct?
yes,
And the credit balance in the withholding tax account is 4,000. When you take this account balance, you are always going to consider closing balance. When you're talking about closing balance, debit 4,000 and credit 1,000. So what will be the difference between these two? Debit
3,000.
and credit? 3,000. 3,000 credit balance or 3,000 debit balance?
It
If
is a
credit side is more,
debit bill.
credit balance.
Then,
If credit is more, credit balance. If debit is more, debit balance. Which side is more?
is a credit.
If credit side is more, this account contains credit balance. So credit balance means negative number. Your TDS account is having credit balance of 3,000.
Yes,
If you take your invoice, if you apply 10% on the invoice 30,000, you will end up getting 3,000 only as TDS. Correct?
yes, yes,
Now if you look at this TDS account, the account balance is showing 3,000 only. If you sum debit and
yes.
credit, clear?
Okay, yeah.
So this is point number one that you need to understand before you start withholding tax account configuration in SAP. Because when you configure, you must know what will be the scenario to be tested in the system. So if you know these two scenarios, scenario number one without advance, scenario number two with advance. If you test this, if you are able to post along with the same number, and you will have to generate all the accounts. Vendor account must show only this amount, and whatever the accounts that you are writing with the manual numbers, every account is supposed to show the same number. You can take any example, any number of your choice, any tax rate of your choice. Accordingly, you need to configure the system and then you need to test it. If you are able to configure and test these kind of scenarios, you can handle, you can work on any kind of a TDS scenario in your project. Because when you configure any TDS, you will always go based on the requirement. If this is the requirement, what is the TDS percentage? What is the TDS percentage that we are taking here? 10%.
10%.
Now these percentages are fixed, predefined by the tax authorities, and your client will tell whatever the services that they are taking, only those things you will be configuring. You will not take the entire dump of Indian taxation or any other country taxation. How many tax rates are there? We will not configure likewise. We will be configuring whatever the scenarios that are applicable for your client as of now. Let's say out of 10 TDS scenarios, your client is using only 3 scenarios. You are going to configure only 3 scenarios because your client will tell currently we are doing only 3 scenarios. Later on, if they add any other scenario, that will be given as additional requirement if during the implementation. If after the implementation, that will be given as support ticket. Clear? Now addition of new withholding tax type, new withholding tax code, identification of issues like this are treated as your support tickets when you're in any project. If you want to tell some support projects, tell this kind of a project, these kind of a things. You can tell this kind of a thing also. They created new bank GL account. During the bank GL creation, because these GL accounts are created by the end user. User did not put relevant to cash flow checkbox on the GL account and they posted the interest. Later on, when they verified, they found that vendor account is short paid by 1000. They raised a ticket for this. Why system did not account or why system did not reverse TDS. You are going to tell that after your investigation, you found that for this GL account, this is not maintained. As a result, I have told them or instructed them what to do, the corrective measures to fix this. So you are going to tell, I asked them to reverse the payment or make the receipt balance payment of 1000. Whatever it is, you are going to explain in your interview. But for all those, they are going to come back to the same point. The whole idea about your TDS interview is around this. If you are clear with these points, you can handle any point in your interview, anything in your project when it comes to TDS. When we do it on the system, we will be seeing different other things because your TDS payable account or any other GL account that you have may be requiring the additional account assignments, maybe default cost center, default profit center, these kind of things. How splitting will happen in these kind of things, how is your profit center derived, how your cost center is derived, all these kind of things you will have to bring into the picture here. But before that, make sure you are able to understand the accounting entries, you are able to understand the flow here. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Right. Let me stop the recording.